Good afternoon, everyone. How we all going? We're good? Loving DDD? All right, so we got our next speaker. Her name is Jess, and Jess wants you to forget about frameworks and wants you to know how the modern CSS toolbox got an upgrade. So please welcome Jess.
Thanks, man. And thank you for all coming to my talk today. I know there was lots of other really good talks on. And thank you also to our sponsors. I'm so happy to be here for DDD's 10th anniversary, and without them, it would not be possible. So thank you to our sponsors. As been said, I am Jess Budd. I work at an online platform called Higher Up, and I'm on all the socials, and if you want to reach out to me, I love hearing from people after I talk. So I got into web development around 2016, so not ye-old Netscape days, but I do have my fair share of IE battle scars. And I remember just falling in love with CSS. It was just so exciting, all of the cool things that we could do. But of course, I couldn't do them at work because browser support was always terrible. Sad face. Have you ever gotten really excited, put your hand up if you have, about a new CSS feature, and then followed by that crushing disappointment when you see the browser support? Yeah, same. Yeah, that used to be pretty much the norm. It could be years between a feature coming out in the first browser and coming out in the last stable browser. But luckily for us, that's no longer the case. The browsers are now working together to ship features, sometimes within months of each other. And the pace of feature release is so fast now, it can be really hard to keep up with it all, especially if writing CSS is only a small part of your day job. So today I want to share with you 5 of my favourite new CSS features that have pretty good browser support. And so unless you're supporting some really old browsers or some uncommon browsers, you can probably start using these, if not tomorrow, very soon. But before we dive too far in, I do want to tell you about another thing that some of you might not have heard about yet, and that's called baseline. So has anyone who's familiar with baseline? Cool, not many of you. Excellent, this will be news to people. So this is a community initiative, and it's all about being a handy shortcut to telling you what the browser support is like of a new feature. So if a feature is baseline, that means it's reliably supported by all 4 of the major browsers, so Chrome, Edge, Safari, Firefox, and that's on desktop and mobile. So there's 4 stages. Limited availability is just what it sounds like on the tin. It's in some of them, not all of them. You probably can't use it in production yet. Baseline newly available means it is reliably supported in all 4 of those browsers, but it might not have been there for very long yet. And baseline widely available means it's been in all those browsers for at least 2.5 years, so good chance you're good to go with these ones. If you want to know where a feature is at, caniuse.com lists it on all of their articles, and MDN is slowly rolling it out to all of their articles as well. So the first one I'm going to talk about today is the new range query syntax. So this is less of a CSS feature and more of a nice developer enhancement for us, just making our lives that little bit nicer. So traditionally, we use media queries for viewport to change our styles depending on what the viewport's doing, and we would say min width. But now we can actually use mathematical operators, so the greater than, less than, and equals. So width is less than or greater than this. So same, we can replace max width with these. And when we want to query between widths, we can use these mathematical operators as well, which is just a little bit nicer. So even though the browser support is pretty good, if your browser doesn't support it, it will ignore it. So if you're still supporting some older browsers, you can use a post CSS plugin. So when your browser support does get to the level that you want, you can just remove the plugin and all your code will be the same. The next thing I want to talk about is native nesting. So if you've ever used a preprocessor like SAS or less, this is going to look really familiar to you. There are some differences, but it will look a lot like what you've seen before. So kind of like how JavaScript has introduced a lot of things that we loved in jQuery, we are seeing native CSS bringing out features that have been inspired by these toolings. So traditionally when we write CSS, we'll have the parent class, and if we want to target children of those parents' class, we'd re-say the parent class each time. And so now we can simply nest those within the parent declaration. And it has the exact same effect as previously. So it's just a little bit nicer to write, and we can co-locate all those styles. We can also nest our media queries, which is really nice for co-location and finding where things are. Now, when this first came out, there was a bit of a limitation in that anything nested had to start with a symbol. So if it was a class or an ID, that's all fine. But when it first came out, we couldn't just nest a type element, so like a div or a h1. We had to put this ampersand in there beforehand. And that was to tell the browser that this is a nested thing, this isn't a CSS property, because browsers couldn't look ahead at that time in the original specification. But they figured this problem out, and now we can do this, which is really cool. We can still use the ampersand. The ampersand is still totally valid. But the specification got updated, and so now the update browsers, it's not needed at all. The reason you need to know about that is just in case you are supporting browsers that were sort of between when it came out and December 2023. The other thing we can do is nest sort of like hover and active styles, and you'll see the ampersand there as well, because without the ampersand, it would actually think that the hover and active were descendant selectors. So we've got that ampersand in there to say, no, that is part of the child. There is a post-CSS plugin for this one as well, because this is one of those features that will break if your browser does not support it. So you can use something like this, so you can start writing all your nested CSS now, and then once browser support gets to where you're comfortable with, you can just remove that. So the next thing I want to talk about is container queries. So I think this one is just a game changer for responsive design. So for 20 years, they're like, no, it's not possible. Browsers cannot do this. But because of the containment API that came out recently, they figured out, actually, we can do this. So now, instead of a traditional media query where we look at the size of the viewport, we can look at the size of the parent container that our component is inside of. So here's an example of a card at different viewports in different situations. So we've got a card taking up an entire row. We've got it 2 columns to a row and 3 columns to a row. And this is all the same component. So traditionally, we probably would have made 3 different variations of that component. And then we'd need to know in advance, where is that component going to be used? So we don't need to do that anymore. So containers are opt-in. So to opt into this behavior, we need to have a parent container with a container type property. I've got inline size here. There is another property it could be, but 99% of the time it's going to be inline size right now, so I'm not going to go into the other one. Once we've declared our container, we use the @ container, so similar to like @ supports or @ media, and then our width of less than or greater than, and we can just put our styles underneath that of what we want to happen once it gets to that size. Sometimes we might have multiple containers, in which case we want to give our container a name with the optional container name property. And then once we've got our name, we put that inside the container query. There is a shorthand for this if you're doing both. The container shorthand property, where you say the name and then the type. This is just a little example of when you might want to use 2 different containers. So you'd announce both of them. And so in this example, we're just saying that the button, we're going to make it full, and we're going to show that the icon when it gets to a certain size. But that's happening independently of what's happening with the card styles. With container queries, we've got some new container query units. CQW and CQH are width and height respectively. CQI and CQB, that's inline size and block size. CQmin is the smaller of those two values, and CQmax is the larger of those two values. If you're not familiar with like inline size and block size terminology, these are CSS logical properties. So what we're used to writing, those are traditional physical properties, and logical properties are a way of defining sort of height and width in a way that will adapt automatically to the writing mode. So English is obviously written left to right, horizontally, but there are other languages that might be written right to left. And so when we use these logical properties, it automatically adapts to the right size, whereas if we were saying left, right, it would stay on the left and right. Not only do we have horizontal languages, we also have vertical languages. And so that's where inline, which would, for English, be the width, actually would become the height on a vertical language. So they swap around. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because there is a generalized move towards using these logical properties. And so when you're looking at your container query units, instead of using width and height, you might want to start using CQI for inline size. And just a little preview of what's coming next. We do have style container queries coming and state container queries coming. So that's an exciting space to watch. Next is my absolute favourite new CSS. If I had to pick one, this is it. And that's the has pseudo selector. So for a long time we were asking for a parent selector, but it's actually like way more powerful than that. It would be better thought of as a sibling selector or a family selector, because it can do a lot more. So we've always been able to go down selectors and pick the last one, but now we can go up selectors and pick the parent of whatever we're looking at. And so I'm going to just go through a few cool use cases. This one's pretty like a common kind of situation. You've got a bunch of cards. Some of them will have an image, some of them won't. And we used to, if we wanted to make the cards with images behave differently, we might add a modifier class to it, to the HTML. But now we can just say, hey, if a card has an image, make it bigger, make it take up more space. And we can also use this with other selectors, like the not selector. And we can say, hey, if the card does not have an image, give it a cool border. And so we're not having to worry, we're going to have to change the markup. We can just do this all in CSS. We can also use things like the next sibling selector. So previously we've always kind of been able to get the next element, but now we can get the element before. So we can do cool things like get the one before and the one after and make it bigger. I think that looks cool. We can also target attributes. So you might have some cards where some of them have a download attribute on the anchor, and we can say, go and get all of the anchors that have a download in the cards, and then add an icon to it and just style that slightly differently. We can also look at like invalid states if you've got a form, and we can say, you know, when the form has an invalid input, just put a big border around it so it's really obvious. One thing to note is that you can't chain a has onto another has, so that's not valid. But we can, you can't nest it. We can't nest them, but we can chain them. So this essentially opens up like logical operators in CSS. So now we can say like, oh, if the container has a video and it has an audio, do these things. And similarly, we can say or by putting them into parentheses. We can say if the container has a video or it hasn't audio do these things. So it just is opening up like a lot of really powerful sort of logic that we never really were able to do before. And so the last new CSS feature, which I think is going to be really useful, are the new viewport units. So viewport units have been around for quite a long time, since about 2015, but they've now given us small viewport units, large viewport units, and dynamic viewport units. So if you, with the OG unit, said, give me 100 viewport height and 100 viewport width, it should take up the entire page, which looks great on desktop. But we've gotten really fancy with our browsers, and now when you're on a mobile, you've often got some like dynamic toolbars, so like your address bar, things that disappear when you scroll and based on your behavior. So what can end up happening if you say 100 viewport height is that it actually gets like pushed down or it gets overlaid, and so what you were expecting to be the entire screen actually is more than the entire screen. And you might think, how big of a problem is this really? Well, it could be a big problem if you got something important there, like a checkout button or an add to cart. You could be losing a fair bit of money actually if you were using that and that happened. So the CSS working group have given us so the small, which is the size it would be if all of the dynamic toolbars are expanded. And they've given us the large viewport units, which is if all of those dynamic toolbars were contracted. They've also given us the dynamic, so that's actually going to change as your toolbar changes. The only thing to be aware of with that one is that the specification doesn't state how much that has to be refreshed. So it could look jankier depending on the browser that you're using. So you might want to test that. And so they all have the DVH, so the D prefix. So this one, there's a really easy fallback. You can just use the original, and then if the browser supports the new ones, it will just fall back gracefully. So there we have my 5 favorite new CSS things. I hope that at this talk you'll go away excited to go and try out some of these new things. Next time you have a front-end problem to solve, maybe they will help you out. If you'd like any of the resources, got a QR code when you can just go, just a lot of MDM links and where you can learn more about these things. And thank you for having me.
All right, we got time for some questions if you're open to them, Jess. All right, so we got time for some questions. Anyone like to ask a question? Yes.
Thanks for your talk. I'm just wondering if you use Tailwind very much and how nicely it might play with these sorts of new features. Do you combine them or do you use it at all, Tailwind?
I actually don't really use Tailwind.
Neither do I. That's why I was interested in asking.
Yeah, I'm not actually 100% sure how Tailwind, if they've implemented many of these things or not.
Right.
Slightly? Not much? I'm sure it will be coming very soon because the browser support is getting really, really good. A lot of these will be baseline widely available in the next 12 months, so I'd be very surprised if the CSS frameworks like Tailwind weren't implementing these in the short term.
All right, one more question. Was that a question?
No. It's a statement like the chain has could get ridiculous at some point in time. Yeah.
Sounds like a question.
I have not tested how far you can go. I know if you're nesting normal things, you can get to 300 because Anton gave a talk about that recently. Don't ever get past if you're getting to 10, you've got a problem. But no, I've never tried chaining them a lot, but I suspect there's probably a pretty stupid limit that you should never ever get to.
I guess the question would be could you chain has and not just ridiculously
you can definitely chain those different things. Like you can chain not, has, and more things. I'm not sure what the practical applications of that would be. You might want to rethink your whole CSS strategy and maybe your life if you're going too far down that road.
All right, so please give another round of applause for Jess.
Thank you.